Hi, everybody. It's Stuart Stevens. It's a Sunday early evening in Kyiv. Um, it's extraordinary to realize the United States is at war with Iran when our greatest foe, as Mitt Romney said correctly in 2012, geopolitical foe, he put it precisely, is Russia. And right now, we're doing very, very little to support Ukraine. You have Marco Rubio campaigning for Viktor Orban, who is as close to a Putin puppet as there exists in Europe. And it's just a tragedy. People say, what's it like in Ukraine? Well, I'll tell you what it's like. It's like a big European city. People are going around doing what they do. I went to a hot yoga class this morning in Kyiv. I was at a spin class. And it was actually interesting. It's a morning spin class. I'm like messing around with my bike. And then I realized that everybody is standing by their bike. And it's because it was 9 o'clock in the morning. And every day at 9 o'clock in the morning, the entire country comes to a standstill. And they have a moment of silence. And then they go on with their lives. So just picture what your city, your town, say you're from Indianapolis, St. Louis, Jackson, Mississippi. What would it be like if you woke up and the second largest army in the world was trying to kill you and your family? I mean, how would you react? You would fight. And that's what they're doing here in Ukraine. Today in Kyiv, I walked around to a lot of the places for the Battle of Kyiv. And, I think that history is going to look back, and already is really, at those first couple of weeks when the Russians invaded as one of these hinges in history, like a D-Day moment. Because if Russians had been able to penetrate Kyiv and get to the power of center and raise the Russian flag, our lives would be very different. There's no question about that. It would have been the beginning of an expansive European war. But they didn't. They fought. And think about it. They opened up armories and they handed out Kalashnikovs to regular citizens with 2 magazines. I saw a video at the time of a guy who was a history professor, and he was asked by a journalist, do you know how to shoot that thing? He goes, no, but I'm going to go home and look at YouTubes. They made thousands, tens of thousands of Molotov cocktails and passed them out. The idea being that if the Russians penetrate into the city, open up your window and throw Molotov cocktails at the tanks. And the battle that was fought here was a lot about territorial defenses, which is basically like our National Guard. You had advertising executives, teachers, plumbers, electricians, not professional soldiers. And they took on really, in that first couple of waves, the elite of the Russian army, and they defeated them. So here we are, it's rolling into year 5 of this war. And I think the most important thing to sort of focus on is Ukraine is winning. Russia has, for 4 years, at a cost of over 1 million casualties, and now 50% of their economy is war economy. They've taken a distance that you could drive in a couple of hours. That's it. I mean, that's an extraordinary failure. And at the same time, they have abandoned any pretense about not being at war with Europe. They just openly say it. And there's so-called hybrid warfare, which is kind of an interesting term of art to describe assassinations, the operating drones near military bases, destabilization efforts. And if they had Ukraine as a base, the largest landmass, largest country in Europe by land, they would move on to Poland. And the polls know this. So, you know, I was drawn to the Republican Party at a time when Ronald Reagan was standing in front of the Berlin Wall and saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And for decades, the beating heart of the most anti-Soviet Union, those against expansive Russian Federation, was the most conservative element of the Republican Party. And now that's the beating heart of the pro-Putin movement in American politics. Think about that. It's as if Churchill's party became pro-Nazi. How did that happen? You know, I asked myself that when Trump got elected with the help of the Russians, which somehow we don't talk about that anymore. And there's no dispute that the Russians helped elect Trump. There's a question of whether or not it was decisive. But let me tell you, somebody did 5 presidential races, won and lost them. You never know what works and what doesn't work. You know, it's the hardest thing in politics is to know exactly what made a difference. But we know the Russians did. Marco Rubio, that guy who, you know, ran against Donald Trump, called him a fool, said he would destroy the Republican Party, and now is his foreign policy lackey. His Senate Intelligence Committee concluded that the Russians did try to elect Trump. So they elected Trump. Think about it. It's the most successful covert operation in history. They elected a president of the United States. And what did they get? Well, look around. At a time when this is as stark a contrast of good versus evil, certainly in Europe, that has been since World War II. And Donald Trump won't even say who invaded who. And he has this sleazy real estate deal, weird fools and knaves and his son-in-law negotiating with the Russians. I mean, it's just absurd. And, you know, there's something that doesn't get talked about enough a lot. Doesn't get talked about enough a lot. And that is the degree to which a lot of conservatives in MAGA, they look at, well, I really can't call them conservatives, but you know what I mean, right-wing, Trumpist. They look at Russia, and what do they see? They see a country that's run by white men. There's no women in power in Russia. They see a country where elections are performative but not definitive. They see a country in which Putin says there's no gay people. They see a country in which they say, well, everyone's Christian, which of course is ridiculous. The Russian Orthodox Church is basically a function of the security state. They have huge Muslim populations. And they look at that and they go, you know, that's not so bad. Maybe we can make America more like that. And it develops this natural sympathy for Russia with these Trumpists that we should not overlook. So, look, what can we do? First thing is we can not let Ukraine be forgotten. I've been here on this little aid mission. We're delivering vehicles and supplies to different brigades that their commanders come into Kyiv and take it back to the front lines and talk to them. And they kind of feel like the war's been forgotten. And when's the last time you saw Ukraine on the front page except over some faux peace negotiations? We don't really read that much about how Russia's casualties, 30,000 a month getting killed. 30,000 a month. They lost about 10,000 in Afghanistan in 10 years. And the drone advantage of Ukrainians is just expanding. And they're reinventing warfare. And at the end of this, the United States is going to have army and military. It's going to have so much to learn from the Ukrainians. But so what can we do? We cannot forget it. We can talk about it. We can think about it. You can support charities if you can. United 24 is the overall charity for support Ukraine. It's a great charity. And we can encourage our elected representatives to do what I think most of them actually know should be done on the Republican side, but they're afraid to go against Donald Trump. And look, Donald Trump is compromised by Russia. There's no question about that. And if you go along with Donald Trump, even though you don't agree with him, that means you're compromised. That's the clinical definition of being compromised. And the Russians have compromised the Republican Party. To a degree, people, I think, really have no idea. And it's actually been going on for a while. Go back to the Russian influence in the NRA, one of the key groups in the Republicans. So if they would only stand up to Trump, but they don't. But we should encourage them to do everything we can to support Ukraine. I think of all those Americans and Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders and Brits who died fighting in Europe, who are buried across Europe, came back to life, is there any question what side they would fight on today? They'd be with Ukraine. So I think that we just need to send as much love and support for Ukraine as we can. They're fighting a battle that is so important to everything that we believe in. So, thanks. Talk to you later.